Hey guys, thank you for your patience. We are back, and as you can see, we are in session number 2 of the day. This session is titled Evolution of Rails, Payments to Data and Beyond. And I don't think we could have better guests for this session because we're joined today by Arvind Ronta, who's the head of product for Visa in India and South Asia. And as you all know, Visa provides the backbone and the rails for payments globally, and in the future I believe that they probably have many more interesting things in the works. In fact, I know that they have many ambitions to expand the services they offer, and it's great to have Arvind here with us today. Joining Arvind is Sid Shetty from the iSpirt Foundation. Sid is somebody who I've been lucky to work with and see his impact firsthand. And while he's very modest, I can tell you that in my opinion, Sid is creating immense value for everyone in this country through the work he does on public digital infrastructure with the iSpirit Foundation. So thank you so much, Sid and Arvind, for being here. This will be a panel discussion moderated by Nikhil, who's a co-founder and CEO of Finarkein Analytics, who's put this entire event together. So Nikhil, over to you, and thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Arvind. So hi Siddharth, hi Arvind, great to have you guys here. So let's start with now that we have the account aggregator launch happening yesterday, it's clearly not a one and done thing. So what's what are the next few immediate steps, and where do we want to see the ecosystem going in say 6 months or so? Siddharth, why don't you take that one?
Sure. Thank you so much, Nikhil, for giving me a chance to be a part of this. And thanks, Ariman, for the introduction, and look forward to your amazing hosting as well through the rest of this conversation. So, Nikhil, building on top of the question which you raised, which is where are we at this point in time when it comes to the account aggregator ecosystem? How does data empowerment evolve going forward? I think what you saw play out over the last week, in fact, there have been two seminal moments. Just yesterday, we had the public launch, the public go live of the account aggregator ecosystem, where you had 300 million bank accounts being made available as part of this network. This is probably the largest open banking rollout in the world. And just a few days prior to that, in a fairly low-key setting, you had a convening of some of the world's top policymakers. This included Margaret Vestager from the EU. Some of you may know GDPR and all the latest EU legislation comes out of her office. You had ministers from Norway, ministers from Rwanda, and many other countries, Australia, ambassadors from France, some of the most advanced nations that are looking into the subject of data protection and data empowerment actually come together because of a deep belief that what's been worked on within the Indian ecosystem has global potential. Where they're coming at it from, and I think if you look at it at this point in time, is we're sitting in the middle of three shifts. One is a shift from data protection to data empowerment. So the conversation is no longer about, yes, I need to protect data, and that's key. But it's also how do I empower individuals and businesses with control over that so that they can access better socioeconomic services, health, finance, education, and other categories. The second is a shift from a legal approach towards a techno-legal approach. The EU, for example, and even Australia, which has the consumer data right, has taken a primarily legal approach towards solving this problem. And that worked fine in the old days when most interactions were physical. So existing institutions could intermediate those interactions, and the regulations and laws would pass on to people. But today that doesn't happen because most interactions are digital. So unless you underpin those digital transactions using open, neutral protocols that encode the principles of the legislation, you will never see privacy or any of these legislations come to life. And so we're seeing a fundamental shift from countries now saying, let's earlier on take a legal approach towards now let's take a techno-legal approach. And the third is there is a significant shift from countries taking an individual siloed approach towards solving this problem, towards now recognition that there needs to be a globally coordinated approach. And for two reasons. And one is, for example, if that doesn't happen, you will see companies leverage jurisdictional arbitrage. This is what happens in tax. right? Companies situate themselves in various countries and pay zero tax, and nation states are at a loss. So that's one. You see the same arbitrage take place when it comes to matters of privacy. And the second is the failure to do that. In fact, will not result in the how do I put it, in the rolling out of these various tools and frameworks that nation states are putting out. And so that's currently where we are sitting. I would say India is probably 3 to 5 years ahead of the rest of the world. We have a short time window, that being said, where not only do we need to see on ground success within the Indian ecosystem, but that success can then be catalyzed globally without losing an opportunity. It's similar to, if you go back in time, the telecom standards that put in place, right? So initially, telecom standards were very country specific. Then there was a need for a globally coordinated approach. So we are in that phase of moving from, say, the first generation of open banking approaches towards the second generation. And I think what's happened yesterday in the Indian ecosystem, with the banks now going live, consent managers now live, transactions already flowing through the system, apps some of you guys may have already downloaded. The real question is now, what are you going to build on top of this? And so that innovation ecosystem, because you're sitting on a pool of 300 million bank accounts, of course that will expand over a period of time. But the real limiting factor today is, what are those new experiences, whether it's money management, wealth management, credit, insurance, and many others that are going to be built on top of this system. And this will require companies building these experiences, as well as companies that enable these experiences. These are middleware companies of various sorts, and those could be through data governance, prediction tooling, and so on. And I think that's really where the focus is going to shift over the next 6 months. And if that happens, and if we start to see, we are already seeing fairly successful consumer apps being built, and as more of that happens, you'll kind of see a virtuous cycle kick in, where you will have more consent managers come in and more providers of data come in. So that's, at least in summary, where I see things are at currently.
Yeah, that's pretty. That's an amazing answer, and things are really shaping up well at a global stage. But Arvind, why don't you chime in from the stakeholders' perspective, from a global entity, and more importantly, closer home, what are you seeing in the Southeast Asian market as well when it comes to these open finance standards?
Sure, Nikhil. First of all, thanks for having me. And second, I think congratulations to the entire industry for launch of account aggregators. And great job, Sid, yesterday on the product demo. I think it was fabulous. Hey, so going to your question, Nikhil, we are seeing an explosion of use cases that are emerging based on open data. And these are actually coming from both mainstream banks as well as fintechs. So let me give you some examples, right? In fintechs, a couple of use cases that are emerging and we are seeing pop up, not just globally, but even in Southeast Asia. One is explosion of all these financial aggregation apps that are offering a single view to customer, they're building advisory or lending modules on top of that. Some of the examples in India include Epify, who we heard from yesterday. Similarly, seamless ID verification and KYC for financial institutions, which could result in onboarding process automation, more efficiencies for onboarding, faster application process, and so on. Number three, faster and more accurate credit scoring and underwriting. It's extremely useful for MSMEs with non-regular income and sometimes no formal documentation. And I think OCEN as a framework, which is emerging in India, is an amazing use case which would leverage the account aggregators framework, as well as tap onto some of the fintechs like Perfios who are playing in this space. Number four, I would say, is price comparison sites, financial marketplaces, bringing more choice for lending and other products. Number five, in fintechs, we are seeing making cross-border transactions simpler and cheaper. If you look at examples like Wise or TransferWise, as they used to be called before, there's been a lot of focus on that. Broadly, there are just a lot more use cases developing around B2B payments or big techs, allowing P2P payments via their platforms. So this is all happening on the fintech side. Then you look at the banks globally, they have adapted to this new reality. And we're seeing a few different models emerging from banks as they see both risks and opportunities with this. And let me give you examples of Europe, because that's where some of the open banking or open data has matured more when it comes to different parts of the world. I think that part has done few things which we are trying to do here as well with open data. So 5 different models are emerging in banks. One is banks like Barclays in UK. They're enhancing their existing product suite to match those offered by new emerging players. Number 2, banks or neobanks like N26, which is very popular in Europe, as you know, they are focused on banking as a marketplace model. So they're integrating core products, services with third-party solutions to offer a wide buffet of services. Number 3 would be banks like Solaris Bank. They're tapped into this model of banking as a service, focused on core infrastructure of banking services, and they leave the front end distribution to the other partners, and could be working with fintechs. Number 4, separate new entity that the banks like RBS would be a good example, where they have launched a separate digital only bank to more easily provide for innovation and targeting new age customer segments that they wouldn't have had otherwise been able to with their legacy infrastructure. And number 5, banking as open platform. If you look at example of BBVA is leading in this space, they're trying to transform banking overall by becoming an open platform where a lot of the new business models and could be supported with some new capabilities. And these are all examples which are actually happening right now in banking. And I think it's a matter of time as we'll see that some of these models make their way to India. I would say some of these have in some way or form or at some scale when it comes to digital only bank or some of the aspects of banking as a service. We hear that it's already top of mind for some of the top banks in India. So these are some of the new models that we are seeing emerging from both banks as well as fintechs.
Yeah, it is very difficult for massive institutions to really undergo that transformative journey, and every day we are seeing new things in the space of fintech and crypto for that matter. Just I think last week or so, Visa brought its first NFT. It seems like a small thing, but I'm sure behind the scenes it was a massive effort. And having to reinvent at scale is something we're seeing play out live, and it's pretty amazing. So let's switch gears a bit towards data, and now that these open data standards are really here, and it looks like they're here to stay, is staying on top of data and having a strong data strategy a priority? It has been for a while, but does the conversation now shift, or it's still more of what we've been doing previously? And Arvind, why don't you start with that?
Yeah, it's a really important question. So let me answer it in this way. One, there are in across the world, right? Like when we see everyone was kind of caught up in pandemic, we saw business models that needed to change rapidly, and as consumer behavior was drastically altered. One of the interesting things we've seen is as businesses find new ways to harness data to help them adjust to these new business realities, one of the key critical role has come out to be the chief data officer, right? And I think and there's been a massive shift. I think as recently as 2012, there were only 12% of large companies which had a chief data officer. And now I think Gartner is estimating by 2025, 90% of large organizations will have this role of chief data officer as they think of formalizing their data strategies. When it comes to us, like at Visa, we look at open data or open banking as a new way to unlock the power of data to empower our consumers and issuers and clients, and ensure that they benefit from these data-driven innovations, as well as also encouraging organizations to be more accountable stewards of consumer data. So how do you protect that data? How do you respect the privacy of customers? So we've kind of certain design guiding principles about data that informs our strategy. So I'll just kind of toss out few that are top of mind for us. So one, we believe that cross-sector and cross-industry data collaboration will unlock much more economic value. So, for example, we have applied our payments data to combat fraud and advise, stakeholders, regulator, clients, issuers on economic trends. We've also we continue to believe that the frameworks and data standards should be open and interoperable. And this interoperability is very key because it helps bring new players into the ecosystem, playing by the same rules, which are transparent and clear, which drives innovation. And that's how the network evolves and creates value for all participants. And we've done that at scale, as you're well aware. What many people don't know, actually, Visa played a key role in developing 3D Secure, which is now everyone understands as two-factor authentication that you do when you purchase something online. It's a globally accepted authentication solution, which is a classic example of an open and interoperable standard, which allows the ecosystem to mushroom and grow. The third one is we believe that security is the foundation for any data economy. And security cannot be an afterthought, as no product or service would be able to scale without trust in payments, right? So trust underpins everything we do at Visa and broadly as an industry. I mean, it's sacrosanct. And our network, brand, partnership, and approach that we take towards innovation hinges on trust. So as an example, Visa, we strive to ensure that our systems are secure. There are 9 billion security events that are managed by Visa every day. So we've got a huge infrastructure and use of AM, machine learning, neural networks. So a lot of that infrastructure is put to use to ensure the security of the ecosystem. The fourth one is a responsible use of data. We believe that data usage and responsible data usage must be a global objective. And there is merit in having a very consistent approach towards the use of data across borders. And that's where I think, we need to be guided by a very clear ethical framework, especially as companies consider, developing applications of data for whole sorts of use cases and different purposes for which the data was initially collected. I think it's very important. It is hinging on aspects of privacy, fairness, accountability, or reliability, so that there's a responsible usage of data. And then finally, we know that the consumer trust is fundamental when it comes to handling of data. And I think we heard a lot yesterday in the account aggregator demo and presentation. Businesses must earn public trust by handling and using this payments data with a commitment towards privacy, transparency, or security. And at Visa, we have earned a reputation, and of course, we are recognized for grounding our innovation in these principles of security, reliability, privacy. And I can tell you, as a product guy, my team can't ship out any product without first thinking of security in mind. So there's always a aspect of balancing act between great experience and secure experience. But having said that, I think security is paramount and fundamental. So basically, in a nutshell, collaboration based on these principles is what we at Visa are looking at doing more and more with a bunch of partners in the India ecosystem, a lot of fintechs, a lot of banks, so that we can collectively take this to the next phase of growth.
Yeah, that's it sounds like a very massive to-do list, but it's a work in progress, right? And yeah, Sid, what has your experience been interacting with the industry as a whole? Everyone always has a wish list. Everyone always wants more. So even with the account aggregator, I'm sure there are a few things that the industry is looking for. Uh, but there has to be a trade-off between privacy and personalization at some point. So what are you hearing from the broader industry in terms of what they're looking for from such open digital ecosystems? Are they happy with what's coming, or is it or chahiye? What has your experience been there?
See, I think a couple of aspects come out. The human aspiration for always wanting more will exist, right? And what status quo will never be enough, and that also drives societal progress. However, I think what's important, especially for the builders that are part of this conversation, is to understand, of course, what more you want from the infrastructure, but to really get your hands dirty in understanding what's already ready, what's already live, and how can you take the current system and take it towards the end goal that all of us are dreaming of. And that's when most value gets created as well. I think that's particularly new for the Indian ecosystem because we're often on the receiving end of copycat laws and copycat technologies and technologies where they're completely ready and have been baked for 10, 15 years, and then we're just consumers of it. But it's high time, especially with the account aggregator infrastructure. I don't think you need any more signals, right? That the time of saying, are banks coming on? When I started a few years back, the question is, I would go get into a room, no one would believe this is possible. Everyone would be like, who the hell will think that banks will go live on the system? Why would banks go live on this system? Why do account aggregators even exist, right? Who will build apps? GDPR exists. Why the hell are we reinventing the wheel, right? Just a couple of days back, you had Margaret Vestey of GDPR essentially say what India has built out is GDPR 2.0, right? So I think it's very important. The only way you can judge that is with a deep first principles approach towards understanding what exists and what is the problem that you're seeking to solve for as a developer and an entrepreneur, and then bridging that gap. Otherwise, you'll just end up with vaporware. The second point, I think, in terms of the question you raised, Nikhil, on open data, I think it's important to clarify. The open data is only one category of data. We use these terms very loosely. Open data, particularly, and if you look at it not just in India but globally, open data is looked at generally as high-level statistical information, aggregate data. So if you categorize data into three types, you have personal data, which is any data attached to an individual's identity. You then have anonymized data, which is you've stripped away identifiable information and other relevant details, and you now have these anonymized data sets generated. It still contains sensitive attributes. And if you remove all sensitive attributes, you essentially end up with open data. For example, economic activity in a region or COVID count in a particular district. Now, these are the three types of data that exist. Open data does not require a consent framework, and many of those data sets are already being put out by institutions in various forms. But what you're seeing is a fundamental shift where in the old world, personal data and anonymized data would exist in silos. Particularly the data economy in the US, which was created, it ended up in some form or the other creating these large monopolies of data brokers, which would essentially be holders of users' information on the back end, and then they would resell that data, and that wasn't privacy friendly or wasn't secure, and that ecosystem is now being disrupted completely. And so you're now moving to a world where, because you have a consent framework possible in real time, because you have network data possible, you're moving to a world where you can actually imagine no data silos existing. When that happens, the real question is your monopoly will not be on the back of data or how much data you hold, which is what, let's say, VCs a few years back would base their investment thesis on. But what are you actually doing with the data? So fundamentally, when you democratize data, the action shifts to what are the predictions you're able to offer on top of it, right? And I think that today is lagging within the ecosystem. That infrastructure and those products that are able to build those new class of predictions, whether it's underwriting predictions, whether it is recommendation engines for different financial products, whether it's fraud predictions, this really becomes the next frontier for a lot of people building in the ecosystem. So we move away from data brokers and data silos. We move away from business models essentially based on hoarding user data. And you really move towards business models that are now saying these are the new class of predictions I'm able to offer on the back of users' data obtained either through the consent framework or the larger non-personal data discussions that are being had, which really relate to how do you access network data and not just individual data sets. So that's at least, in my view, how things seem to be shaping up currently.
Yeah, it's going to take a while, but I feel we're moving up something like the Maslow's pyramid, right, where we've got the basics in place now, and we're moving towards richer and deeper use cases. And yeah, so quickly
And
before.
it's not just it's going to take a while. I want to debunk this myth that exists. And in fact, I also was I would say, a victim of this myth that we
Okay.
seem to be lagging behind,
Yeah.
and every other country seems to be ahead. And over the last few weeks, in the run up to this global conversation we had, I ended up speaking to a few open banking heads of various companies and banks globally. And if I go country by country, it's quite fascinating. Singapore, for example, which proclaims they have the world's first consented data sharing infrastructure, at least as per their website, all they share is balances, right? So they have one service that allows you to share demographics, and the second service, Singapore Findex, only shares balances. That's it. There's no sharing of last 12 months granular transactional data. Hong Kong is still in a pilot mode. So what the Monetary Authority of Hong Kong announced a couple of months back is still being piloted by the various banks in that country. And then when you look at Taiwan and Korea, one of them is essentially just sharing open data, list of ATMs and bank branches, and the other still has no consented data sharing infrastructure in place. So I think it's very important, and I'm talking about the Asian market. This can be extrapolated to Australia and the EU as well, and of course the US. But I think it's very clear. I think people need to sort of get out of this comfort zone that things aren't ready or things are yet to come, and recognize the opportunity that's at hand. If we don't, then of course we will lose out, and we will have other companies go ahead and build and end up serving, rather than this being an opportunity for Indian companies to go out and globalize as well, which did happen. If you go back in time, how did Nokia Networks and Ericsson grow? They built on the back of GSM standards. So when GSM globalized, along came Nokia and Ericsson. And you see similar strategies with Huawei, right? They set the 5G standards for the world, and therefore, if you are adopting 5G, you either adopted Huawei or try to build your own, which we know takes time and is difficult. So I think it's important that Indian entrepreneurs really seize the moment. It's going to be a playing field and a battleground between upstarts, new age companies, existing incumbents, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out over the next few months. But I think that moment of saying things aren't ready, or things are yet to come, or things are still nascent, has clearly shifted and is behind us.
I also, sorry, Nikhil. I think
Go ahead. Yeah.
to build on that, I think it's important to understand. There used to be a time when differentiation in financial services was basis what data you have, and what customer relationships you have. Now, I think given as the access to data is more open and is more formalized through AA framework as an example, what use cases and how you use data is going to be more important to scale up, right? So let's take one example of Oken. I think the use of account aggregator framework is for many different applications, but I feel like a very powerful application is to bridge the credit gap in the MSMEs, which Oken framework tries to do, leveraging account aggregator framework. Now, how does a scale come, right? Scale would come if the industry participants on both sides, both the lender and the platforms which are surfacing these loans to the end borrower or the SME borrower, when they start to participate in these frameworks or these business models, right? So the use case will drive usage and scale, and then the use case themselves would be driven by how are there clear rules of participation, right? And the Oken framework has a way to how you participate, how do you certify, what is the business model for that. I think those things, as we think through, would make a use case more credible. And as use cases become more sustainable, credible, more parties would participate, and scale would naturally happen. So I think that I kind of agree with Sid's point that what you do with this data is now going to be more important versus that, access to data is now formalized. What insights you can derive if you're a PFM app, or what how you use this data to underwrite basis the cash flows on an account. If you are a lender, I think those things are going to be the new differentiators.
Yeah, and I think we are a little short of time now. So, quickly before we wrap this conversation, uh, how should builders reach out to iSpirit, to Visa, and collaborate? What are the options, and what's coming next? Said that would be for you. What's coming next? What are the next set of ODEs that the audience can look forward to?
Sure. I think, one is if someone wants to reach out, I'm available at siddharth.shetty@ispirit.in. But I think more importantly, it's one should reach out to the various market players in the ecosystem, right? Because these are the ones that are actually building different components, different pieces of that puzzle. And if one is an entrepreneur, one needs to figure out where they fit in that puzzle. And so I think conversations with Sahamati, conversations with the different technology service providers, conversations with the different banks and middleware companies would be, of course, a lot more useful to jump in, to figure out where to build, to figure out where opportunity lies. I think in terms of the next set of ODEs, I would say you could, again, look at it really in two parts. One is this rolling out within the data empowerment and protection architecture, rolling out within the Indian ecosystem beyond finance. This was already announced by Prime Minister Modi for health information, and this has been rolling out quite actively in parallel by the National Health Authority. And similarly, this forms a crucial fabric of India's privacy bill. So it will also cater to private categories of data going forward. In fact, if some of you have been following the conversations in the US, with the shutting off of third-party cookies, there are now very active conversations happening around who collects consent, where does data get processed, what are the innovation competitive effects of this, what is the design of a level playing field happening within the W3C group, where the browser specs are determined as we speak, right? So it's clear that this framework also gets extended to private categories of data like ads and e-commerce and others going forward. In addition to that, I think the globalization of this is extremely important. And so thinking of this ecosystem, not just in the Indian context, but designing and building it global first, especially for the many players out here, because one does tend to get stuck in a trap as well, which is where when you start building for India and you put it out saying we'll think about globalization 2 to 3 years from now, one could lose out that opportunity. Because you're looking at a 2 to 3 year gap within which all of these ecosystems in other parts of the world are looking for answers, and if those answers don't get filled in, they will look at other solutions, right? So I think that global opportunity is key, and we should seize that moment as well. We lost that out in the case of, I would say, UPI and some of our other infrastructure, but we shouldn't lose that out, particularly in the case of DAPA. In parallel to this, of course, is what Arvind spoke about, which is the Open Credit Enablement Network, which is specific to bringing cash flow lending to life. This is already live for MSMEs that are part of the GEM system. They're getting real-time loans on the back of their information capital, and will soon be launched for MSMEs that are part of the larger GST system. And you'll see this basically part of the fabric of various marketplaces going forward. So I would say the OKIN is another ecosystem within the fintech space that people could start looking to build within. But both are complementary. As Arvind mentioned, OKIN and account aggregator are complementary. And so I think people should just pick one and go really deep and build something that's world-class so that it works in India and works across the rest of the world as well.
Yeah, I hope builders on this stream are listening. It's time to build, guys. Arvind, any closing thoughts on your end?
I think just collaboration is key. Visa is very, closely collaborating with iSpirt on this. We actually want to see these ecosystems grow and scale up, and to the extent Visa can help, with our experience and breadth and depth of our assets and people, we were working closely with iSpirt and a lot of industry players, specifically in Open. But yeah, I mean, to your question on how to reach, hit me up on LinkedIn, or bother Sid, and he'll let us know that there are requests coming in through iSpirt. That's also fine. But yeah, I mean, let's collaborate, let's build stuff, and let's ship it out. This is really exciting moment for India, and I think we shouldn't let it go.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank
Amazing.
you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you guys in the audience for watching. I know you all really appreciated that. So thank you for the emojis. It got me super charged up. I'm really glad, grateful, appreciative of the fact that we have people like Sid, Arvind, and Nikhil working on these problems and thinking about these things, because it's going to benefit all of us in the long run. So thank you once again, Sid, Arvind, and Nikhil. And please stay tuned in the audience. We'll be back in just 2 to 3 minutes with our next one. So see you guys in a moment.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thank you.